Hey family, how you doing? Welcome again to another video. And it's another historical one that we're doing. Not that this video is history per se. It's about history. That's what I'm talking about. So welcome family. So glad that you have joined us, and really do appreciate it. And we are going to continue our discussion. Oh, got a bug here, a little gnat here. We're going to continue our discussion on what we've been talking about. Now, the last video, if you haven't watched that, that was actually a part 2 of Wida, talking about the kingdom of Wida. And in there we went through, we provided source after historical source after historical source after historical source, letting us know that, again, that the kingdom of Wida was not Judah. There's nothing at all that suggests that period. It doesn't. And we didn't just rely on a little clip or anything like that, but instead we actually went through several sources of historical sources that show us that it's not it. And not only that, one would also have to prove the fact that biblically, that if by chance that is the kingdom of Judah, as in Judah in the Bible, then what we have learned is that the kingdom of Wida, which later became Benin, sold slaves. It sold slaves. So where in scripture will you find that Judah sold Judah into slavery? And I've had a couple of people come to me and, try to answer that with these, talking about, well, black Americans kill other black Americans. And I've said, no. We're not talking about that. We're talking about scripture. We're going straight to scripture. Where in scripture will you find Judah selling itself? Now, when we did the history study of the kingdom of Wida, they didn't sell themselves. What they actually did was they went into the interior of Africa, and out of that they brought out slaves, who was us. That was us, because we were the ones that were scattered to the four corners. It wasn't Wida. They weren't the ones. They were a slave trading port, like a major one at that. And they did dealings, had special dealings with the Portuguese. Remember, the Portuguese initially didn't even want to get into slave trade. They actually wanted to get the gold and all the other natural resources, but slaves weren't really their thing. But there's nothing at all when we, as we looked at the history itself, that says that this was somehow the kingdom of Judah. And what we also included in that was because in addition to reading books, that's easy to do, I also like hearing firsthand accounts of people, actual people. And then I actually played a video, if you saw that, if you watched it at the end, of someone who actually went to Wida, which now is a town. It's a town in Benin. And they actually had a discussion with one of the elders. Just to make sure we're hitting all of our points. We can go to our books, and the books are good and well resourced and everything, but you also got to listen to the people. That's the most important part, when you're doing research. And what we found out of there, he was asked point blank, this elder in Wida was asked point blank, was this the kingdom of Judah as in the Bible? Hebrew Israelites, that kind of thing. And he kind of laughed. He was like, no, I've never heard of that. That's the first I've heard of that. And then he went on and gave some other information, but no, not at all. So any research that does not include the personal testimonies of people who are on the land, you understand what I'm saying, and who have access to the elders and can give us that firsthand information, I don't know what to say, because what we don't want to do, particularly for us here in the West, is continue this mistake that the Christian missionaries did, is that we're going to tell you your history. And sadly, that's what I see a lot of that happening in Israel, is that somehow we've gotten this authority from somewhere, where we believe we have this authority that we can tell the nations their history while we're in captivity. Figure that one out. Anyway, let's continue here. Now, before I get into this, I do want to mention something. As you know, I do not, and I'm kind of maintain, I'm very careful in mentioning people's names, and I'm not going to do that tonight. Okay. But what I'm about to say, you will probably figure out who I'm talking about. There is an individual who years ago, it was like a few years ago, actually, it was probably about, if I had to guess, it was probably like 2.5 years ago, maybe. I actually met this individual in Louisiana, New Orleans, Louisiana. And Nicole and I, we were probably about a year in to the truth, maybe a little bit more, not sure. And so anyway, we actually came across him, and I was excited of the fact that I met, because I had seen his work on YouTube, and I thought he was doing at that time, I thought he was doing a tremendous job. And so I was very excited to meet him. And so, at that time, I was actually had a relationship with another person who does research, I guess, within Israel. And over time, and unfortunately, like I said, we had worked with this individual. We, played a part in making sure his movie got on deck, so to speak. And for those of you who are old enough to remember that, we did that. And so, but what we noticed, there was a lot of things that changed, and it changed in a not too good direction, from what we saw. We tried to warn that individual, but, it just whatever. So we kind of parted ways there and kind of left them alone. And so when I saw this particular individual that I met, like I said, I was very excited, because one of the things that I saw, and my wife saw as well, just immediately off the cuff, was his humility, and how he delivered, the stuff that he posted and all of that. And I just was like, wow, this guy's going to go far. So I saw him, and I approached him, and just exchanged the pleasantries or whatever. And so I don't know, we talked about something. I don't know what we were saying. I remember the room being so loud. But I did say this, like, I got real close to him, and I basically was telling him, I said, listen, I said, one of the things I talked about was just, one of the big issues that we have right now in Israel is pride. And then what I told him was this, I said, I talked about, I didn't mention a person's name, but I said, you got an individual here who knows a lot, but he's very prideful. And I said, you can't be that. I said, as long as you stay humble before the Most High, and you just give yourself to him, I said, you will go far with that. And then after that, my wife and I both laid hands on him, and we prayed, and we just blessed him, prayed blessing over his family, and then prayed a blessing over the ministry that he has. And I remember that. I don't know and I'm sure he did not forget that either. And but yeah, that was the only direct contact that I had with that individual since. And that's it. And then I've kind of moved on, and he's moved on, and he's done some pretty good work and all of that. And so when I learned that, just recently, he too decided to openly throw just a little bit of shade, my way, I was a little disappointed at that. And because what it showed me is that, just the simple advice that was given there, it doesn't seem like he adhered to that. And so I want to show you something here. And, unfortunately, this is what happens. Humility goes a very long way. It really does. Let me bring this up for you. Okay, so this, if you remember in that video that we did the other day where we talked about Judah, what we actually did was, fortunately, we was able to get in contact with someone who is Portuguese, and they was able to give us the breakdown of what Judah means and how, and what it actually means. So, so what this individual basically did, not the Portuguese, the person who understands Portuguese, but, the person I'm talking about now, he presented this, what you see on your screen. And what I wrote on the top, I wrote this on the top. I said, Google Translate does not replace people. It doesn't. And so anybody that does some, any level of research, You know, if you're in high school or if you're in college or whatever, Google Translate is really, or any online translator for that matter, is kind of like a point of reference. It's not like a said and done, yes and amen. It's, you know, anybody that's, you know, if you're really trying to, you know, solidify a particular point as it relates to language translation, Google Translate really isn't it. You know, it's okay, but ultimately you have to talk to the actual people so that you can get the correct spelling of the word. You know what I'm saying? And how it's actually said. And so that's something that we've actually run into when we were dealing with some of the Bantu languages. You have to talk to the people because they'll look at Google Translate and say, no, that is not it. This is how we say it. So it's, you know, so you have to actually talk to the people. So anyway, so this is what was posted here. And it said, you know, he says Judah on the left, Judah on the left-hand side, right? And the translation on the right in Portuguese is, whoa, look at that, Juda. Well, that's a perfect match, right? What was on the map. But wait a minute. This is what I wrote below. The English did not arrive in Benin until 1897. That was the Benin exposition. So they would not have drawn the maps to say Judah. Okay, let me say that again so that you can really catch that. Okay, so what this individual was doing was trying to prove the point that Judah, Judah, actually in Portuguese means Judah. But see, the issue is that you're writing that from the perspective of someone that speaks English. The Portuguese were the ones that actually made that initial contact with the people of the Kingdom of Ouida, not the English. The English and the Portuguese, their initial contact was like in the, 1500s. The English didn't get there until close to 1900. You understand what I'm saying? So this right here is from the perspective of an English speaker, not from the perspective of those who actually sailed that part of the gold slave coast. Do you understand? Something else I want to show you too as well. Let me see. Where is it? Okay. So this is actually another translation. And then I'll show you Google as well, you know, just for the sake of argument, I'll show you Google as well. But this is another online translator. I actually looked up and I said, what would be the best online translator for Portuguese? And I was able to, and I came up with this one here. So this is one here. And like I said, for me personally, I don't really put a lot of stock on online translators. I just really use it as a guide, but then I end up usually having to talk to someone who can speak the language just to confirm it, right? Or I'll do some other searches just to confirm it. Okay, so Ajuda, A-J-U-D-A, Ajuda, okay, A-J-U-D-A, all right? And so when you type that in, it tells you right here, okay? From Portuguese, so this is from Portuguese to English. And so the Portuguese way is Ajuda. That's a Portuguese word. Okay. So if you see that anywhere as it relates to the Kingdom of Ouida, it's sometimes, and like we identified, sometimes it was written as Ajuda. I didn't see that too often, but they did mention that. So there you go. So Ajuda, and if you translate it into the English, what does that say? It means help. And they even give you the translation of it. Okay. So Ajuda means help. Okay. Again, it has to be from the perspective of the explorers and the traders who were Portuguese. They were not English. Okay. All right. Here's another one here. So now if I type in Judah, J-U-D-A-H, and do a translation of it into Portuguese, then yes, the way they write it is J-U-D-A. That makes sense. But again, this is from the perspective of an English speaker. The English did not get to that coastline or even to that country, or I should say kingdom, until the very late 1800s, very, very late, 1897. So this is from the perspective of an English speaker. And see, this is the problem, like I said, that we have within Israel, is that we want to project our view of the world onto other people and kind of shut them and leave them out of the discussion. That's not right. That's not fair. And it's not accurate. You can't do that. You know, their input is of great value, and we want to hear from these people so that we can round out what we're saying, or if we need to make corrections, we make those corrections. Now, for the sake of argument, I went here to Google Translate as well, and I typed in from the perspective of someone who's Portuguese, ajuda, A-J-U-D-A. And then the English translation of it is what? Help. So even Google in this particular time, they actually got it right. Do you understand what I'm saying? But again, just so you understand, it's from the perspective of the explorer or the traders. And they were Portuguese. They were not English. Okay. So I wanted to go through that exercise right quick, you know, because it's really sad, you know, that, you know, when you don't adhere to just something very simple as that, it can be, it's a simple thing, but so many people have a hard time with it, particularly in Israel. And it's this whole issue. Like I said, we're very prideful people. We really are. And, you know, anything from us being on the street corners, telling folks, you know, who they are and what's going to happen. And you're going from that to the online, the unlimited amount of debates that you see. We tore him up. You know, we destroyed his doctrine. You know, they faced the prophets and they failed and all of this stuff. And like I said, I'll be the first to tell you, I am in no way, shape or form. I don't see myself necessarily as a historian in the sense of being one who has spent years and years out in the field per se, you know, and being able to come out with books and stuff. I'm not anywhere near that level. I would definitely probably embarrass myself doing something like that. But so this is why we rely on the works of others who have, you know, and to also clear something up too. It's, you know, again, it's a lot of things, but, you know, people, you know, I heard there was a comment that kept coming up, you know, that you're accusing someone of using the Ashkenazis of validating you, but here you're using people who are Ashkenazi in your own research. I said, well, that's a little, I said, now let's look at this. Number one, the Ashkenazi, what we had talked about in that video that we referred to some time back, this Ashkenazi rabbi was actually prophesying basically and talking about the day is going to come when the Jew and the blacks and here in America and Africa, we're all going to be together. And he was validating the fact that we are also Israel. So that was a validation of identity. I don't need validation of identity. Everything that you've seen here is not a validation of my personal identity. That's already been settled as far as I'm concerned. Everything that you've been seeing here is looking at the claims that are being made by certain individuals and lining it up with actual historians, you know, and so that's what that is. That's not a personal validation. It's different, totally different. So anyway, so I just wanted to hit those two things. And I really do pray that, you know, like I always say, and I tell people all the time, as long as you're breathing, as long as we're breathing, there's always hope. You know, there's always an opportunity that the Most High is giving you to make a change, to make a difference, and, you know, to do that. And I, you know, all I can do is, you know, pray that that will come back to remembrance. That conversation will come back to remembrance. So, okay. So anyway, so in this video here, like I said, we're going to get into the Sephardics, and I've been looking forward to this because I've kind of touched on it here and there in different videos, you know, and I've gone into it in great detail in others. But this one, I think, really gets to the heart of it. And this is why I'm so excited about this particular one, because I really know that it's going to clear a lot of things up. But many of us, again, when we first came into the truth, we were told that we were tied to, our lineage is tied to the Sephardic Jews. And like you, I've also believed that. I embraced that as well. But I didn't really think clearly about that until, you know, I guess over time. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm tied to them. No, I don't know about that. And then it wasn't until you know, if you don't have this book, I would highly recommend you getting it. And that's The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews. I tell you, my hats go off to the Nation of Islam, you know, and how they, in those books, it's filled with so many footnotes. I mean, I mean, I've categorized those books as just research books. I mean, in other words, they're reference books because there's so many footnotes in it. I can't get past 3 or 4 pages unless I'm stopping and I'm looking, okay, where's this book? Okay, I need to order this book. It's like that. I mean, they put so many, it's not just they're pulling quotes from other people, but they're actually giving you the references of where you can find it. You know, not where you can find it, but the name and the author and all that stuff. And so, you know, people who like to research history, oh, it's like a candy store. And so, but man, they have done a fantastic job when it comes to really outlining, you know, this relationship, if you will, between blacks and Jews. I mention that because in the book, they spent a great deal of time talking about who played some of the people who played a major role in the slave trade. And you guessed it, or maybe you didn't. It was the Sephardics that played a key role in the slave trade. Now, it vacillates here and there throughout the duration of time. In other words, they went from being direct to being indirect and all of that. But nonetheless, Sephardics definitely played a key role in the slave trade. And in the series of books that they have with the secret relationship between blacks and Jews, it then rolls into introducing the Ashkenazi Jews, or the Eastern European Jews. It starts getting into that as well. And so it just, I mean, it's there, but they spend a great deal of time talking about the Sephardic Jews and the role that they played. So once I read that, I was like, they can't be our people. If they weren't enslaving us, man, how can they be our people? And it even talked about not just here in the United States, but also in the Caribbean, down all the way down into Brazil. You know, we've talked about that. We've done videos on this as well, where in Brazil, I think one of the largest synagogues was established there. But the way they treated our people down there, it was raw wickedness. It was a whole nother level from the way we were treated here in the United States, and just how bad it was. They were terrible in how they treated our people. And but anyway, that was all Sephardic. So that kind of got the ball rolling for me once I read that. And I was like, how in the world, if the Sephardics are me, and I don't understand, how can we both be like that? You know what I'm saying? In other words, how are they beating us and we're part of the same quote unquote tribe of Judah? That doesn't make any sense. So that's always stayed in the back of my mind. But as I began to start reading other books and research papers and things like that, it became more and more evident that that wasn't the case at all, that they weren't our people, you know, and it was something completely different. And so in this video, what we're going to do is actually do like we did in the other videos. We're going to actually pull from multiple resources as well, just to kind of paint a more holistic picture so you can see exactly who these people are. And then we just going to go from there. And like all the other videos that we do, you know, the information is presented and it's up to you at the end of the day on, you know, what you want to do with it. You know, what I would prefer is that you take this information and you use it, if you can, you know, in your own personal research. Meaning, in other words, okay, he gave, you know, this video gives you some starting points. And then from there, you take it and maybe you find some other stuff that will help us to paint this picture here, a more accurate picture. So that's really the hope and the intention of this particular video, like all the other ones. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's see where we want to begin here. We are going to start with, oh yes. Okay. So we're going to start with this one here. Okay. So I want to start with this particular thing right here, because again, and let me just bring this up again. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've come across people who say that, you know, you wanted the older books are the most accurate. And I tell you, that is the most asinine claim to make, because, you know, because what people are alleging is that the older books, they're the first accounts. But here's the thing you got to keep in, versus using books that were written, let's say, in the 1900s or in the 2000s, because those books, none of those books are accurate. That's what we're supposed to believe. None of those books are accurate. But the ones that were written all the way back then, oh, those are the most accurate. That is the most asinine logic out there. And that would not even pass through the door of any college or university. It wouldn't do that at all. These newer books that our people, Israel in particular, like to disdain, you know, unless it's convenient. These newer books, when you look through the footnotes and the bibliographies and all of that, it contains references to these older books. This is why we always try to give people access to the things that we find so that you can check those things out for yourself, you know? So anyway, so this is one of the sources here that people like, a lot of people within Israel like to point to as proof positive that these Sephardic Jews were, or, you know, or these black Portuguese were in fact black. And we're going to find something about it because that's a partial truth. Okay. But first, what we're going to do is, this is, let's see, the Critical Review or Annals of Literature, Volume 57. And let me see what was the year on this. Let me see if it will give us a year. As you can see, it's quite, volume, let me see. See, okay, it's not. It's probably right down there. It's written in Roman numerals. I'm not going to do the Roman numerals. I'm too tired. But it's not giving me that. But you could tell this is a pretty old book. And as we get into this, you'll see for yourself. Yeah, it's quite old. Okay. So, but we're going to look at this because there's a quote in here. If you can see that little, well, yeah, you should be able to see it on the screen. There's a part, this latter part of this paragraph on this particular page, on page 141, is something that you'll see quite a few of our of Hebrews referring to this particular part and saying, see, that's it. That's the proof. That's the evidence. But the one thing we always try to teach our people here is that you never build a case based on one little piece of evidence, right? The more you can get, the better. You understand what I'm saying? If you're a police officer or a police investigator, why settle for a snippet of the handkerchief when you got the whole handkerchief and the coat to go with it? You understand what I'm saying? You don't just build the case off of a slither of the handkerchief. You got to look at the whole thing if you have access to it, right? And fortunately, in this case, we do. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to read this whole paragraph, and then we're going to kind of break it down, right? So that you can see there's some nuggets in there that's going to lead us to some other places. Okay. So it's not just this, you know, this is proof that, let me see if I can get to one. I'll just see where I can get to one here. Hold on. Let me see. I'm just scrolling down here. Okay, here we go. Okay, like this right here. Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa, and from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, as they are called. And they stop there. And that's it. Close the book. We're done. That's it. You don't need any other answers. That's it. But you have to read what's before it so you can get the full picture of what's being said. Okay. And that will make a little more sense. So let's go ahead and read this. Okay. And for those who, you know, say the older books are accurate. Okay. Let's read it. Okay. Because this actually does give us some information that is a little more accurate when you keep it in context. Okay. All right, let's go. Gonzalez was the first, and pardon the pauses here as I'm reading, because, you know, back then the letter F's were actually S's. That's how they were pronounced. So it takes my brain a minute to adjust with that. So anyway, Gonzalez was the first Portuguese who in 1442 returned with Negro slaves purchased instead of the Africans who had till then been carried off by mere violence. But soon after, the Portuguese became better acquainted with the African regions and their valuable productions. Prince Henry founded the first Guinea Company that settled factories in the forest of Arguin and got the exclusive privilege of trading with the Arabs. I'll stop there now. I'll just mention that now. The Arab land, that's Negro land. That part of that was where it says Negro land. That was the range. If you see these old maps and it has Negro land on it, well, that was like Arab territory, you know, from what I can see, because if you notice, it just says Negro land, you know. Now, I'm not talking about the older map. Well, it's probably that too. I'm talking about the map that on the top part of Africa where it just said Negro land. That was actually, a lot of that was Arab territory. And if you notice, it's not as detailed in that area as it is in Portugal and the areas where Spain controlled. They had a little more detail. When it got to that area that the Arabs controlled, it was just called Negro land. That was just their lazy way of naming it. Okay, that's where Negro land actually came from. So anyway, let's go ahead and continue. And again, we talked about that in previous videos. Okay, so if you're already triggered by what I just said, go back to the previous videos. We've actually talked about that, and I've showed you some of that. But we are going to do a video specifically about Negro land in the future. I'm gonna take a short break on his history videos, but I will return and do that one soon on Negro land, so we can learn more about that. Okay. Prince Henry founded the first Guinea Company that settled factories in the forest of Arguin. Hope I'm saying that right. And got the exclusive privilege of trading with Arabs. The trade soon increased, so that in 1455, no less than 700 or 800 Negroes, slaves, were annually exported to Lisbon. Okay, now I wonder if hope you caught that. So they were exporting slaves from Guinea or Africa up until Lisbon. Where's Lisbon? Portugal. Okay, so they were getting African slaves from Africa, obviously, and they were bringing them into Lisbon. This was actually the earliest slave trade dealing as far as Africans outside of Africa. This right here, what you're seeing here. Lisbon, and we're going to learn more about that. It's really interesting. I learned quite a bit interesting, and anyway, I don't want to get ahead of myself. But what we're going to learn about in the slave society within Lisbon, again, we're not talking about the transatlantic slave trade. We're not talking about that. We're talking about just Portugal going into Africa, bringing up Africans and using them as slaves within Portugal. Okay, that's what we're talking about. Let me see here. Exported to Lisbon. At length, the Portuguese in 1471 discovered the Gold Coast, and ever since the intercourse between Portugal and Guinea was continued. The Portuguese endeavored to exclude other nations from Guinea, whilst the rest of Europe navigators were, in spite of Papa Bulls and all the reports of indefusory spread of the pretended dangers of that coast, striving to get a share of that profitable gold trade. The discovery of the Gold Coast served indeed yet more to enlarge the sphere of the navigation of the Portuguese than their slave trade, but it forced them also to extend themselves on the coast and to settle colonies in Congo, Angola, and other places which they had till then neglected. Prince Henry's colonies were enlarged by his, successors. King John II in 1492 expelled all the Jews to the island of St. Thomas. Okay, now this is where a lot of Hebrews get stuck. All right, because we're like, see, that's us, which had been discovered in 1471, and to other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa. Okay, so so you got that clear. So these Portuguese Jews were expelled out of Portugal, and they were pushed to these various colonies, Portuguese colonies in Africa. All right, so there we go. All right, so let me see here. Where was I? And to other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa. And from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews in Luango, which are despised even by the very Negroes, are descended. Now, this is where our people get stuck. Okay, we're going to read that again, and I'll read to the end of this page. I think I'm going to read a little bit of the other. But this right here, we're going to put an anchor here. All right, this is where we're going to drop our anchor. All right, Jews. Okay, so let me go back. King John II in 1492 expelled all the Jews to the island of St. Thomas, which had been discovered in 1471, and to other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa. And from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews in Luango, by the way, which is in Angola, today what we call Angola, Jews in Luango, who are despised, as they are called, and the Jews in, oh, sorry, back up. I know, I'm sorry, y'all, I'm messing you up here. Well, let me see. Let me start here one more time. King John II in 1492 expelled all the Jews to the island of St. Thomas, which had been discovered in 1471, and to other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa. And from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews in Luango, who are despised even by the very Negroes, are descended. Now let's stop there. Okay, now we're going to do a breakdown here. So what they're saying here is that these banished Jews, who, when it says the Black Portuguese, as they are called, so these banished Jews, these were black, or, you know, what they saying, Black Portuguese. All right, they were Jewish and Portuguese, which basically means they were Sephardic. Okay, so these Black Portuguese Jews, all right, so that's indisputable. Okay, were despised even by the very Negroes. Let's stop here for a second. So if they were black, now if they were black and they were Negroes, because see, you remember that Zondervan thing? I don't have that up here right now, but you remember that quote from the Zondervan when it talks about, but not the Negroes, and how we as Hebrews, we've latched onto that and said, see, Negroes, we're the Negroes. See, now it's sounding a little bit odd here, because here in this excerpt, it's making a distinction between these banished Jews and Negroes. Okay, and it's saying that the Negroes despise them, even though they had both descended. They're descendant of each other. Are you following me? They're descendant of each other, but the Negroes that as Hebrews today identify with are saying our ancestors, the Negroes, right? They despise these ones here. And they're saying here that but in here they're saying that they are described as Black Portuguese. So you got Black Portuguese and you got Negroes. So how can we claim both? Okay, something to think about there. How are we claiming both of them? This is what we're talking about. And it's saying, but these both of them, the Negroes and the Black Portuguese, they're both descended. Something to think about here. All right. The anchor is still there, but we're now going to get on our little boat and we're going to go out a little bit further. OK, but the anchor is still here. All right. Let's see, by these colonists, St. Thomas soon became a considerable place of trade and valuable for its sugar plantations. 30 years after their settlement, not less than 156, I guess that's 66,000 arobs of 30 pounds weight each of sugar were exported, and the engines of 60 sugar works turned by slaves. These Negroes were purchased in Guinea, Congo, and Mani-Congo, and these colonists had plantations furnished with from 150 to 3,000 Negro slaves. So they're just staying on these Negro slaves. The Negroes were described as Negro slaves. They were described as slaves. Are you following me? The only ones here in this whole excerpt that were described as slaves are the Negroes, not the black Portuguese. The Negroes are the ones that are described as slaves, not the black Portuguese. Okay? And this same clip that a lot of Hebrews quote from, like this little excerpt, they use both. You're using both. You're trying to identify with both. You can't identify with both because this right here, this same writing, oh, it's an old book. We got to go with the old books. This is the most accurate. Okay, let's stay with the old book. The old book here is making the distinction between the Negro and the black Portuguese. And it's saying that the Negroes didn't even like them. All right, let's continue. Let's see, colonists and plant. Okay, from 106, I'm gonna say 60. I guess that's it's saying 50. I guess I don't know, 50 or 60 to 3,000 Negro slaves. Let's continue. In the beginning of the, and that's where they usually stop. That's where people usually stop with that. See, case closed. We're done. In the beginning of the 16th century, the Spaniards and Portuguese began to transport Negroes. Notice it didn't say black Portuguese. It did not say black Portuguese. It said the Negroes. The Negroes were already in Luango, which is in Angola. All right. For similar labors to West Indies and Brazil. Hold on. Okay. Brazil, by which the Negro trade was rapidly increased. Notice they're still talking about Negroes now. The Spaniards on their first settling in the West Indies immediately treated the natives of that part of the globe according to the Pope's instructions, and they divided them by families or districts among themselves as slaves. The poor, let's go on here. What's this next one here? Indians. See, now they're talking about Indians. So this person who wrote this, they're actually very detailed. It's the people who actually have excerpted this, have left this stuff out. And sadly, the people who left this stuff out are the people who call themselves Hebrews today. This is why we got to be honest, family, when we're looking at this stuff. History isn't like a Build-A-Bear. We got to look at all of this stuff. Okay, so it's talking about Indians, all right? So the poor Indians, they didn't say black folks. They didn't call the Indians Negroes. They called them Indians because he knew, whoever wrote this was very clear, that you had the black Portuguese who were just mentioned there, and that was it. They were brought down, and the Negroes didn't even like them. And then from there on, they're talking about Negroes, slaves, Negroes, slaves. That's all you hear. And now they're talking about in the islands in the Caribbean. Now they're talking about the Indians. Is this the Caribbean? Hold on for a second. I think he's talking about Brazil. Sorry. The Indians were now forced to die for pearls and wash gold, sand, and work gold and silver mines for their new masters. And then it goes on. You can read that. Now it's talking about the Indians. So this writer made a classification of 3 types of people: the black Portuguese, the Negroes, and the Indians. Okay. So now we have a much clearer understanding of what was being discussed here. Okay. So there was a distinct difference between the black Portuguese, I know I'm repeating myself, and the Negroes. Okay. So now let's learn a little bit more about these black Portuguese. Okay, let's learn a little bit more. Give me just a moment here and let me pull something up here and let me see. Where do I begin? Oh, okay. Let me show you this one here. Let me show you this. Not that. This. Okay, so this was a slide I did. Okay, so these black Portuguese now. We got two scenarios. Scenario A, Africans who were initially brought up as slaves to Portugal were considered black Portuguese when they were pushed out of the country. That's scenario A. I'm not saying that's the case, just so we're clear. That is not a statement of fact. I'm saying that is a possible scenario. That these black Portuguese, that these Africans, sorry, that were brought up from Guinea and all other parts of Africa that were brought up, and they went down as far as the Kingdom of Congo, by the way, up into Portugal. The first question is, after they were there for a certain period of time, were they then considered black Portuguese? And when they say black Portuguese, are they talking about these slaves? Are they talking about that? Or B, these were the children of Portuguese and imported African slaves. Again, I'm not saying these are statements of fact in either case. I'm not saying that at all. But these are two things here, because like I said, we put our anchor there, and now we got to stop and think for a second. We're like, okay, well, who did these black Portuguese? Okay, well, now let's now dive in a little bit and see if we can find out a little bit more about who they were. Okay, so let's go. And let me see where I want to take you next. Okay, so the next source that we're going to look at is not that. We're going to look at this. This book right here is called A Social History of Black Slaves and Freedmen in Portugal. I'm getting this book. I was trying to find it, and I'm still trying to find it. Look, if someone's watching this and you have access to this, let me know. I definitely want to get this, not just I want to get the digital. I would like to get the digital. If I got to get the paperback, I'll get it, but I'd like to get the digital. But I got some excerpts of it that we're going to use tonight. But this is a book. But anyway, the author of this book, this is all they've studied for years and years and years. This actually came out, I think, initially back in 1952, if I believe. It started off with a series of research papers, where they actually took the time and they researched this topic. And they just for years, that's what they do. And so the source is extremely credible. Okay, so I just want to make sure that you could take the time and you could search for yourself. Okay, so anyway, let's go to that. We're going to look at a couple of things in this book here. Okay, so this is my first tab here. We're going to be on page 19. Okay, page 19 in this book. And by the way, yep, you can access at least portions of this book in Google Books. So let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Yep, and we can, and let's go. All right, so the exact name of this section is Numbers and Prices. Okay, so again, just to recap, they, hold on. Do I need to start here? Hold on for a second. Hold on for a second. Hold on for a second, family. Let me see. I'm going to skip a little bit. And then because I may actually need to read up a little bit higher. Okay, so again, just a recap based off of that reading that we did on that old book, right? Portugal went down into Spain. Portugal went down into Africa, and they basically got slaves and brought them up to Portugal. Now, what were they doing up there? Well, this is what we're going to learn, okay? All right, so here we go. A surprising feature of the internal commerce in slaves in Portugal, where many transactions were recorded by notaries public, is the relative paucity of bills of sale for slaves in notarial registers. Admittedly, very few registers survive from the period under study, and none at all from Lisbon, the center of the trade. Prior to 1561, still the global impression obtained is that Portuguese notaries, unlike their counterparts in Castile, where there was also a considerable trade in slaves, drew up very few bills of sale. I have found only 3 bills of sale concerning the slaves, and in 2 of them, the transaction was conducted by representatives of the seller. This suggests that these sales were recorded by the notary so as to ensure that all was above board and that the representative letters of procuration were in order. All right, let me skip down here. Okay, there's a lot more info. I'm just going to skip down there. It's like I said, we can spend all day on this, but I want to kind of get to the main points here. Numbers and prices. Okay, let's read this. The exact number of black slaves landed and sold in Lisbon in the 15th and 16th century is unlikely ever to be known, because most of the commercial and fiscal records of the Casa da Guin and the Casa dos Escravos were destroyed in Lisbon earthquakes of 1755. Now, remember, we did a video on that earthquake. Man, when I tell you judgment rained down on Lisbon, go back and read that. And one day they had a typhoon that came through. It was an earthquake. It was a tidal wave, and then fires, and then massive theft, all in one day. Can you imagine that? But anyway, 1755. Hence, one can only gain an approximate idea of the volume of the slave trade from computations based on fragmentary official evidence and the estimates of reliable observers. One thing that is certain is that the number of slaves acquired in Africa steadily increased between 1441 and 1555. The royal chronicler, Zorara, estimated that from 1441 to 1448, only 927 were brought from Mauritania and Sahel. And I have a map here, Mauritania. How about, I didn't even know where that was. It's right here. Okay, just so you can see. I mean, I knew it was in Africa, but I was like, where in Africa? Anyway, learning every day, right? Anyway, so Mauritania and Sahel. By 1455, 1456, however, when the trade had become the principal means of acquiring slaves, Cadamosto reported that 800 to 1,000 slaves came from the same area every year. Duarte Pacheco Pereira, referring to the turn of the 16th century, affirmed that 200 to 400 slaves came annually from the river Senegal, and 3,500 from all Upper Guinea, that is the coast from the Senegal to Cape Palmas. But this was only when the trade was properly managed, which he implied was not the case when he wrote. The slave trade appears to have been subject to great annual fluctuations in volume, and evidence from various sources indicates that the first decade of the 1500s saw a decline in activity for some as yet unknown reason. All right, okay. So this right here is kind of a chart, and it shows you how you can see how it kind of like increased. You know, it was going up. Okay, name, and they give you the name of the captain and all that stuff. They were going into Africa, and they were bringing these people up. Okay. All right, so let me read here. Estimates of the number of slaves involved in the Gulf of Guinea trade are exceedingly high. Perhaps the most plausible credits São Tomé with receiving some 6,300 slaves from the mainland between 1525 and 1527. That is between 2,000 and 3,000 a year. Other estimates of the Congo trade in the next 2 decades are even higher, but these figures are based on the numbers of ships which carried slaves and not on exact counts of slaves abroad. In any case, as in Table 2 shows, very few of the slaves landed in São Tomé were sent on to Portugal, under 100 a year before 1525, and an average of 250 a year between 1526 and 1534. Okay, so I don't have to continue to read all of this, but I wanted to read this section here so you can get a general idea of just the volume of slaves. I mean, it was definitely a lot for that time. Let's just put it that way. and they were coming into Santo. Oh, no, sorry, they were coming into Portugal. All right, let's jump to the same book. Let's jump to here. And I gotta check my notes here. We're gonna go to the second paragraph on this page. All right, let's read this. This, however, was not the view of all 16th century Portuguese. And in fact, the first complaints about the superfluity of slaves appeared in the second half of the century, precisely when immigration to Brazil was increasing. In 1562, the Cortes of Lisbon received a petition from a group zealous for common good, who were of the opinion that it had been an error to bring so many slaves to Portugal. Did you hear that? Okay, so let's continue. So many slaves to Portugal. Slaves, the zealots claim, wasted the available food supplies and forced those whose work was now done by slaves into lives of laziness, vagabondage, robbery, or prostitution. In 1589, Amador Arias declared that there had never been enough food for the native Portuguese, let alone for slaves. So notice they made a distinction between the slaves, which we've established came out of Africa, and the native Portuguese. So when they described the native Portuguese here, how did they describe them? As just regular citizens. The slaves, which came from Africa, they described them as what? Slaves. And shortly afterwards, he was echoed in this opinion by Duarte Nunes do Leal. If anything, these arguments implied that the immigration was a response to the importation of slaves, which deprived freedmen of food and jobs. The frequent reenactment of laws against vagrancy, some of which attempted to deal with the problem by shipping sturdy beggars overseas, also seems to indicate that there was a shortage of employment, which could only have been aggravated by the use of slave labor. Okay, so again, in this paragraph here, they made a distinction between the Portuguese, regardless if they were black or not, that's irrelevant. They were Portuguese, right? And the slaves. The slaves came from Africa, and they worked as slaves. And then you have the Portuguese, which is on this side here. And so the Portuguese were like looking down on these slaves, which in that writing that we read earlier were described as Negroes. All right. And so now what this is starting to do is starting to paint a picture that describes that sounds a lot like Jim Crow South. And this book really goes into that and how it was in many ways it was like Jim Crow South. You know, so this was if I could describe this period in my own words, based on what I'm reading, this really was like the precursor to what we saw in the Americas, you know, because before they did the transatlantic slave trade, this almost seemed like this was a dry run for it. And well, let me get to the next excerpt here. This was, okay, so this one, we're going to do page 81 to 92. All right. I know I'm doing a lot of reading, but if you want to know the truth, family, you know, this is part of it. Okay. This is part of it. This is the work that you got to go through to get to the truth. Okay. We can't deal with excerpts here. We got to read as much as we can and make sure we're keeping things in its most fullest context. Okay. If you don't have time, if you're like, man, this is too much reading, I can't take it, then take a break, go watch some other videos, go take a nap, or maybe come back another day, and y'all willing, this video will still be here. Okay. But, you know, don't just be dismissive and just, I can't read the rest. No, you got to go through this. Okay. The life of a slave. Let's learn about the life of a slave. In many respects, the life of black slaves resembled that of the white lower classes. Okay. Read that again. In many respects, the life of black slaves resembled that of the white lower classes. Blacks dressed, ate, and worked in much of the same way as whites, were taught to speak the same language, and answered to the same Christian names. They were expected to conform to the same legal, religious, and moral codes. Subjection to a master did not differentiate slaves so clearly from the white commoners as might be imagined. So again, they're making the distinction in this particular case that you had white commoners and black slaves. Okay. Many members of the lower classes were subject to a master and depended upon him for their food, lodging, clothing, and medical care. Furthermore, the master's powers of corporal punishment extended over all persons in his household. Even wages did not constitute a clear distinction between free laborers and slaves, because some white servants did not serve for money, and some slaves could keep a little of the money they earned in the streets. Rather than subjection per se, it was the degree of subjection that distinguished slaves from free servants. Slaves were servants for life. Unless sold or free, they could not leave their master's possessions. The legal implications of this status will be considered more fully in the next chapter. But as far as the daily life of slaves was concerned, it meant that their bodies were far more under their master's control and more open to physical and sexual abuse than those of free servants. The free servants were. Their African cultural inheritance further distinguished black slaves from white commoners. Did you hear that? Although not perhaps as completely as in Brazil, elements of African culture survived in Portugal and influenced blacks' adjustment to European civilization. Many blacks spoke a form of Portuguese whose morphology, got that maybe, and syntax has been amended to suit people accustomed to African languages. African music and dances flourished at the slaves' own gatherings and were performed by blacks at Portuguese festivities. Wow, doesn't that sound just like America? Remember Congo Square? That sounds exactly just like America. Together with the disabilities of servile status, the amalgamation of African and European culture gave a characteristic tenor to the daily life of black slaves and set them apart as a community distinct from lower class white society. So these are the black folks that were in Portugal. They came from Africa. Baptism and slave children. Let's read about that. Black slaves imported from Africa were supposed to be baptized when they entered Portugal or shortly thereafter. Those who were born in the country were supposed to be baptized in their local parish church. Of course, some adult slaves preferred to be referred to remain infidels, and some masters took no steps to encourage Christianity amongst their bondsmen. All the same, most black slaves, both Christian and adults, probably became at the least nominal Christians. The names were entered into baptismal registers together with those of free children. The slave's Christian name usually seems to have been chosen by his owner. Although slaves might acquire a nickname, very few of their baptismal names were at all out of the ordinary, nor did they serve to hold the slave up to ridicule. For instance, of a group of 5 male slaves purchased for Queen Catarina in 1550, 4 received the name Antonio and 1 Fernando, while 4 women brought at the same time were all named Maria. One of the master's own names might become the name of his or her slave. Thus, the daughter of Catarina, a slave belonging to one Guiomar Silveira, received the name of Guiomar, and the slave child was Christian Alfonso after his mother's owner, Maria Alfonso. Occasionally, slave parents were conceded at the right to name their own children. Thus, a slave child born in Olivenza in 1562 was named Juliana after her aunt Juliana and Pierce. Okay, so let's see. This really gives a whole lot. I'm all into this, family. It just gives a lot of detail, but for the sake of not losing people, you know, because I know people check out when you start reading. But it really does. It paints. I think I've covered the main things I wanted to hit in this excerpt, but it talks about just the life of the black slaves. Okay, that's really what all of this is talking about here. Let me see because I don't want to miss anything here. Okay, now this is a good part here. A very few masters not only recognized their children by slave mistresses, but went on to obtain decrees of legitimation for them from the crown. The masters who did so were mainly clerics or members of the gentry, wealthy men who wanted an heir to their own flesh, regardless of color. Pay attention to that. So what does that mean? These were black, what? Portuguese. It's telling you here that the Portuguese who made it with their slaves, their African slaves, they actually went through the process, not all of them, but quite a few of them went through the process to make them legitimate so that they can be a rightful heir to this Portuguese man's stuff. So now we're starting to get a clear picture now when we go back to that initial reading we did. Why they were so despised by the Negroes, right? But they shared the same descentry. They were from the same, they descended from the same source, which was what? Africa. You see that? All right, so here we go. The wealthy men who wanted an heir to their own flesh, regardless of color. The birth of these children was obviously a time for rejoicing, but Clenardus noted that in most houses of birth of a slave child was greeted warmly. Let me read that again. The birth of these children was obviously a time for rejoicing, but Clenardus noted that in most houses the birth of a slave child was greeted warmly. Whether or not he was the father, the master of the household often became fond of his slaves' children, and affection for a slave born or brought up in the house was frequently cited for a cause for manumission. All right, let's see. I'm gonna read this. Okay, to be sure, the birth of a slave child might be welcome solely for pecuniary reasons. Let's see. Clenardus also observed that some masters made a considerable profit from the sale of homeborn slaves, and that they encouraged their slave women to lie with healthy black slaves rather than an anti-clerical gibe with the parish priest. He likened these masters to pigeon breeders or owners of stud farms. Okay, it goes on and on. So now we're getting a more clear picture. Okay, who exactly these black Portuguese were. All right, so that's that source here. I think I'm finished with this source here. Let me see. Is that the only one? Let me see. Yeah, this is the, okay, so that's that source there. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to switch up here. And now we're going to go back to, let me see what I have. Okay, yeah, I'll get to those slides later. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up this other thing here, Adobe. Okay, so now we're going to go to these papers here. All right. Okay, so this is, what's the name of this? Because now we're going to learn more about we're still dealing with the Sephardics, but now we're, because I think we've kind of really established that there was a distinct difference between black Portuguese and Negroes. And we've established the fact that us claiming to be Hebrews, the discrepancy of how we try to claim both. You can't be a Negro and be a black Portuguese at the same time. No, that's not the case. All right. Now, there may be some historical examples that you may find where the two were, sometime they may accidentally called one a Negro, and then they, a black Portuguese, a Negro or whatever. That may have been possible, so that's very possible. However, now we're going to look at this, because if these are black Portuguese being black Sephardics, well, let's learn a little bit more about the Sephardics if these were Negroes, right? So let's take a look at this. Crossing empires, Portuguese, Sephardic, and Dutch business networks in the Atlantic slave trade. Well, and from 1580 to 1674. Now, wait a minute. Portuguese, Sephardic, and Dutch business networks. Huh? Wait a minute now. Okay. All right. So we're going to get into this. I have a few things that's highlighted. And so, yeah, let's go ahead and get into this. Okay. This article will partly fill this void in the literature by examining the financial and commercial networks of Portuguese, Sephardic, and Dutch participants in the transatlantic slave trade. This is not, that's not really sounding like our people here. All right, I'm just scrolling down. There's a lot of detail in here, family. I just, for brevity's sake, I highlighted a few things in here, and then I have another one we're going to look at too. In spite of the truce, the troops of the company and the Portuguese crown had more bloody military encounters than ever in Angola and Brazil between 1645 and 1654. These military events had a tremendous impact on trade, since Angola was a major market for slave labor, and Brazil was, at the time, the major producer of sugar for Northern European consumer markets. Private merchants felt the effects severely. Only in 1662 did Portugal sign a peace treaty with the Republic. The restoration of the Portuguese independence in 1640 also put an end to the easy access to Portuguese and Sephardic merchants to Spain's American colonies and the Spanish Asiento, changing the business opportunities they enjoyed. So again, what they're saying here, the Portuguese and the Sephardic sitting in a tree making MONEEE money. Okay, so that's what they were doing. The Portuguese and Sephardics, the Sephardics now, it doesn't matter if they had dark skin. We don't care about that. The claim is that the Sephardics are our people. But as you're seeing here, and here's all your footnotes. Well, that's new. That's brand new. Doesn't look like an old book. Here's all your footnotes here. You can research for yourself, and they're researching. And look, just for people can see for yourself, what are some of the things they're quoting out of? Things written in 1498, something written in 1639. You got it. I'm just saying. Okay. So, the fact that you have to explain that, it's just, I don't get it. But anyway, but as you can see here, these people work together. All right, let me scroll down. Scroll down. Let me see if I had anything else in this. Okay. Let me see. It may have been something at the end here. Yeah, there's a lot in here. And I just, like I said, again, I didn't want to overburden folks with all of this. But like I said, you'll definitely look it up and you can look at it for yourself. Okay, here's another one. However, the Portuguese Sephardim in Amsterdam no longer, so these Portuguese Sephardim, they were also located in Amsterdam. Amsterdam, even though they trade, that was like more the upper office, so to speak. They're the ones that kind of like controlled the slave trade. That was like the boardroom, basically. That's how Amsterdam was. So, but who was there? Portuguese Sephardic Jews, they were there. Supposedly our people, okay? However, the Portuguese Sephardim in Amsterdam no longer appeared to be directly engaged in the slave trade, see? They are referred to in the primary sources mainly as buyers and holders of company shares, usually for the Chamber of Amsterdam. These shares were often brought from Dutch brokers and not directly from the stock exchange. The closest relationship of the Portuguese Sephardim in the Republic to the slave trade was probably through their connections with the Sephardic Jews and the Dutch planters based in the Dutch Caribbean and Dutch Guyana. Hence, over time, the participation of the Sephardim in the slave trade came to be indirect and in the form of financial instruments, whereas Dutch private merchants were at the forefront of the businesses. However, following the footsteps of their Sephardic predecessors, their participation in the slave trade also encompassed regions under the control of various European states, such as the Gold Coast, Angola, Rio de la Plata, Brazil, Morocco, Suriname, and the Spanish Americans. Sephardics were right in the middle of this, family. Okay, in the Republic, most private merchants made use of two types of commercial agents: supercargoes sent on board the ships, and factors placed on shore, or on board floating trading posts. Both Sephardic and Dutch merchants employed their services. The Sephardic merchants signed labor contracts with several traders to be factors in Western Africa. Some of these men even had institutional ties with the contractadores of the royal monopolies. Luis Fernandez, supercargo of Gaspar Nunez, as well as Simão Rodrigues Pinal and Estevão Rodrigues Penso, supercargoes. Okay, they mentioned all these names here. All right. Let's see. Great example. Okay. Let me see contract. Okay. Remember. Okay. All right. There you go. So so just adding more information there. All right. Let's scroll down here. Portuguese, Sephardic, and Dutch merchants did business with these middlemen in several regions along the West African coast, namely at the ports of Rafisque, Portugal, and João, and on the Petite Corte of Senegambia, as well as the regions of Luango and Congo. Pieter van der Broeke, for instance, established contacts with several Portuguese and Euro-Africans at different ports on the coast during the second voyage to Western Africa. These commercial transactions continued under their rule of the company. In fact, in none of their possessions taken over by the company did company employees dare to penetrate much into the interior. In the Gold Coast, São Tomé, and Angola, the employees responsible for the trade relied on middlemen who would bring the African merchandise and foodstuffs from the remote areas in the interior to the coast. The various groups of commercial agents were connected with each other. Together, they formed commercial webs covering key points of the commercial circuits, and their efficiency was crucial to the operation of the vast slave routes linking Europe, Western Africa, and the Americas. Let me see. All right, so that's it with that document there. Again, the name of this is called Crossing Empires, Portuguese, Sephardic, and Dutch Business Networks in the Atlantic Slave Trade from 1580 to 1674. And like I said, again, you are more than welcome when you check out this source for yourself. Check them out. You know, you can't just go by me reading it. You got to look for yourself before you start jumping in the comments. Okay. Just saying. Anyway, let's get into this next one here. And I don't think I had that much highlighted in this one. Forms a cooperation between the Dutch, Flemish, Sephardim, and Portuguese private merchants for the Western African trade with the former Dutch and Iberian Atlantic empires from 1590 to 1674. All right, I'm just going to scroll on down. Okay, here we go. This article will address some of the issues by examining how private merchants based in the Dutch Republic, Portugal, Spain, and their imperial spheres of influence did join efforts to reduce risk and maximize profits, finding various forms of cooperation to enable them to operate within the former Dutch, Portuguese, and Spanish Atlantic empires. The focus will be on the Amsterdam merchant community, which included not only Dutchmen, but also Flemish, Germans, French, Italians, Portuguese, Sephardic Jews. Okay. Here, special attention will be given to their activities in the Atlantic and Western Africa between 1580 and 1674. They got all the footnotes there. You can check them out for yourself. Like I said, I think this was the one. Okay, here we go. Amsterdam's merchants engaged in multiple forms of cooperation for insurance and other financial transactions. Such networks transcended religious affiliations, since many of the ships, along with their outward and return cargoes, were insured by the Dutch, Flemish, German entrepreneurs based in Amsterdam, were the property of, and like we said, Amsterdam, and that was like the headquarters, right? And who was there? It was the Sephardics. They were sitting up there too. They had their chair. Were the property of, or were frightened by the Portuguese Sephardic merchants. Check this out. They were frightened by the Portuguese Sephardic merchants living in the city or elsewhere in the Republic. On the 22nd of March, 1613, for example, Antony Van Diemen, Albert, shoot, they're naming some of these people here, and among other merchants in Amsterdam, insured de Engel Michael. The ship had been freighted. Did I say frightened? Sorry, freighted. Freighted. That's what I meant to say, freighted. The ship had been freighted by Diogo Nunes Belmont, a Portuguese Sephardic merchant of Amsterdam, to sail between Luanda, the West Indies, and Seville, under the command of skipper, and then they named the person. Enslaved Africans were to be transported on the first leg of the journey, while Spanish bullion, gold, silver, and other goods would make up the cargo for the return voyage to Spain. Dutch and Portuguese entrepreneurs based in the Republic also insured ships for merchant base elsewhere, and vessels sailing between various regions within the Atlantic world, such as Portugal and Western Africa. In these types of deal, the Portuguese Sephardim in Amsterdam acted as contacts for the merchants based in Portugal or in other Portuguese possessions in the Atlantic. Let's go here. On the 29th of July, 1662, for instance, Joseph de la Rios, a Portuguese Sephardic merchant of Amsterdam, took out insurance for the whole of de Leeft, I hope I'm saying that right, sailing between the Maze River, the coast of Guinea, i.e. Gold Coast, and Cadiz under skipper William Joppin Noteboom. Okay, so these Sephardics, I'm just showing you, we're going through all this so you can see how deep these Sephardics were in this. Again, the claim is that we're the descendant of these people, okay? Insurance was not only the financial business which Portuguese, Dutch, and Flemish and other merchants appeared associated. The acquisition of wick bonds was regarded by the Portuguese Sephardic merchants based in Amsterdam as a profitable activity. To purchase and dispose of the wick shares at the city stock exchange, they used the services of Dutch brokers. In October and November 1660, for instance, Abraham Senna, a Portuguese Sephardim in Amsterdam, authorized the broker John van Haringhoek to dispose of wick bonds valued at 2,400 florins at an interest rate of 35%. During this period, Portuguese merchants based in Portugal and Portuguese Atlantic possessions also kept on using the connections of Portuguese Sephardim in Amsterdam to ensure the transport of commodities in Dutch vessels. For instance, and then they named this guy of the Portuguese crown in the Republic, and a prominent member of the Portuguese quote-unquote nation in Amsterdam made an agreement on behalf of Francisco Ribeiro, de Costa and Company, merchants of Angola and Madeira, for the transport of goods from these regions. All right, and then it goes on there. I think that's all I'm gonna read here, because I think I've kind of really beat this to the ground here, just so you can see that these Sephardics were right in there, and they were really part of this slave trade. I mean, really part of it. So again, if the Sephardics are our people and they are Judah, the question that I'm going to continue to ask is, where do you find in scripture where Judah sold Judah into slavery? You're not going to find that. You will find scenarios where Israel did engage in wickedness, like in Amos 2. Someone pointed that out, where you have Israel did it was something about selling the poor and the needy or something like that. That was Israel, and there was a judgment for Israel on that. But when you read further down or up, one of the two, there was a separate judgment for Judah. And Judah was not accused by the Most High of selling anybody. Okay? So again, there's no scenario that we find in scripture where Judah, not saying Israel, Judah sold himself into slavery. That's the equivalent of someone beating themselves up. That doesn't make sense at all, right? Anyway, let me see what else I have here. Oh, what was it? I want to show you guys. Hold on. I'm going to show you this one here. Now this, hold on for a second. Let me highlight this so I won't lose my place. Okay, so now those that the things that I read to you just now, everything I read to you, that's all scholarly work. Okay, this right here is also scholarly work. However, when you read the footnote of it, like they said, the book you can't even find anymore. They said at least publicly you can't get anymore. The author, it was something weird. It's like the author actually, right after the book was published, the author died, and they said, you know, so it's. You can find the work, but it's kind of spread out in different papers. So we're just going to put this on a separate table. Okay. The other stuff is already, that's scholarly work. We got that. Okay. So this right here, we're just going to sit this on a separate paper. I would say this is scholarly work too, but because we don't see any footnotes and stuff, it's, you know, I'm not saying it's false. I'm just saying, you know, for the sake of for critics to look at this, I'm letting them know that we're putting that on a separate table. However, it is worthy to be read. I think it's, you know, because it does tie into, you know, what we've been talking about here. Okay, so let me get to this. All right, so this is called Jewish Children of San Tome. All right, so I'm gonna scroll down to this part here. And what this ties into, it ties into what we were talking about in that other one, right? I was saying either these black Portuguese were the actual slaves or they were part of the intermixing of the Portuguese men and African slave women. You know what I mean? And so this kind of really adds to it, you know what I mean, as well. So we're just going to read this part. This kind of constant violence is indicated indirectly by the subsequent behavior and attitude of the children when they grew up and their descendants as, okay, hold up, back up again. This kind of constant violence is indicated indirectly in the subsequent behavior and attitude of the children when they grew up and their descendants as they inherited their parents' internalized anger and fears. That is the somatized and probably inarticulate memories of the original trauma of the kidnapping and exile. A trauma reinforced with each subsequent act of cruelty and abuse. After marrying with African slaves brought to San Tome, the Jewish children produced a mestizo population, notorious for both its obstreperousness and cruelty. Quite interesting. San Tome became known as Portugal's least manageable tropical colony, one where the native elite, mostly the mestizo landowners still called New Christians, way into the 18th century, resisted rule from the metropolis both by the crown and the church. The island was also feared as one of the worst places for slaves, either those kept in camps before being transshipped to the New World or those working on the sugar plantations or other enterprises. Though later settlers and government agents came to the island from the metropolis or territories of Portugal, the character of San Tome was sent by the traumatized Jewish children who arrived in 1493, and this character bears the hallmarks of victims of massive abuse, projected violence against others, resistance to authority, disassociation of feelings of sympathy to one's family and friends, and a general relentlessness. So let me see here and go back. So there was a class of people called the mestizo that were made up of African women, as it said here, and these Portuguese men. The children, when they grew up, they were ruthless, according to this. Now, the reason why I went to read this is because of the fact this ties back to, is this it here? This ties back to this document that we just read, that we read in the beginning of this. Remember how they said how the Negro slaves didn't like them? They didn't like this class of people coming down there. Down there meaning in Luongo. Well, maybe this is the reason. You know what I'm saying? It's quite interesting. Quite interesting there. Quite interesting. Okay, so that's all for that. And we're in the home stretch here, family. Let me see. Let me go back here. And there's a couple of points I do want to make, and then we're finished. Okay, let me bring this up here. And there we go. Okay, so what I did is I actually looked for these. I looked for the oldest images that I could find, depictions of Sephardic Jews. Now, I know there's going to be some people that are saying they're whited out and all this stuff. We're going to look at that claim in a moment. Okay, we're going to look at that claim in a moment. But these are the oldest depictions that I can find of Sephardic Jews. There's some older ones, I'm sure, that are around. But as you can see, all of them don't look like us. Okay. Now, there are some that are out there that do kind of look like us, you know, and in some cases, like those mestizos, I'm sure these were a combination. They were a mix of black and white. You know what I'm saying? So I'm sure you had some that, quite a few of them that had hair texture like ours and everything. That would make perfect sense. But they were still considered different than the Negroes. Okay. But here are some of the older depictions of Sephardic Jews. Okay. Let me get to this next slide here. All right. So for the claim of, well, you know, these are probably whited out, you know, and so your brother, you're not looking at the right things because they were whited out and all this stuff. I'm very familiar with the whole terminology of whited out. And I'm also very aware that, yes, that did in fact happen, you know, throughout European history and other, you know, areas as well. That did happen, you know, so I'm in no denial of that. But as it pertains to the Sephardic Jews, okay, let me read what I wrote here. Must produce historical evidence that shows that there was a concerted effort to whiten out the Sephardic population in Spain/Portugal. This evidence can easily be found in the Caribbean nations like the Dominican Republic, Cuba, or in South America, Argentina, Brazil, etc. One can also point to the colorism social systems in these areas. So in these areas that I just mentioned, you can clearly find instances, or you can find where it was almost like a matter of state mandate that the population had to be whited out. So you'll find things depicted like you see here in artwork. This is called the Redemption of Ham. And this is showing, you see, many of you may have seen this already. You got the grandmother, you know, and she's a darker skin, right? And you see in the middle is the daughter, right? And the daughter, she's a little bit lighter, right? And then on the right-hand side, that's the husband. So the daughter, she who is mixed because the husband, or not the husband, or the father was probably Spanish, right? Or Portuguese, one of the two. And so, well, according to, this painting, he would have been Portuguese. So the younger woman got with this Portuguese man who you see kind of grinning on the side, and he's looking down. Both of them are looking down at this light-skinned baby, right? And what is the grandmother doing? She's praising the Most High, praising God. Oh, we finally got rid of this dark skin. So in artwork, and there's other art pieces too, you know, like I said, for the sake of time, we ain't got to go through all of that. But also you'll find in policies and things like that, in all of these areas, it's very clear that there was a whited out agenda. So the burden of proof for people to make the claim that there was a whited out agenda in Spain and Portugal, you got to produce that. And as of right now, I haven't found that. And quite honestly, it didn't really sound like they were too concerned about that. They just wanted to get rid of us. You know, there's a few exceptions where they, you know, made it with us and all that stuff. But other than that, it doesn't seem like there was an agenda to whiten out all these slaves. No, they wanted slaves. They wanted African slaves so that they can sell them. They didn't care about whitening them out. Now, to go even further, what you will see in Portugal, when you start going to places like in South America, like Argentina and in Brazil, What you will see, though, it is, like I said, again, it's well established that the Sephardics did engage in these whited out campaigns because they were brown. A lot of these were brown, right? These Sephardics. And so they wanted to make sure that their population stayed white. You know what I'm saying? And so that's why you go to places like Argentina or Chile and some of these areas, and these folks are white. And it's like, whoa, how did they get so white down there? Because they made sure that they kept it white. So there are areas where you can clearly see this, but it's the burden of proof are on individuals who want to make the claim that this is the same policy or agenda that took place in Portugal. And like I said, from what I've seen, I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that at all. But like I said, it could be there, but I haven't seen it. Let's see. Oh, final thing. Yeah, the final thing I want to show you. Okay, and then we are finished. Okay, so the last claim that we want to talk about, just to kind of add more to this. Okay, so if we are the descendants of the Sephardics abided by what? The Torah, yeah, and the Talmud. Well, let's take a look at what is said in the Talmud about Negroes. Okay, let's take a look at that, about black folks. Let's take a look. And these are just, you can do a search for this. This is on any page. You can, do a search for this on your own. And this is straight out of the Talmud. Ham and his descendants are cursed with black skin because Ham had sex while in the ark. Let's read it. It says, our rabbis taught 3 copulated in the ark, and they were all punished: the dog, the raven, and Ham. The dog was doomed to be tied. The raven expectores his seed into the mate's mouth. Disgusting. And Ham was smitten in his skin. This is the Talmud that Sephardic Jews abided by. Let's see here. What's this next one here? Okay, here's another one. Negroes are lumped in with deceased persons and called creatures. R. Joshua B. Levi said on seeing pock-marked persons, one says, "Blessed be he who makes strange creatures." An objection was raised. If one sees a Negro, a very red or very white person, a hunchback, a dwarf, or a dropsical person, he says, "Blessed be he who makes strange creatures." This is in the Talmud. So these Sephardics saw us as diseased or strange creatures. The Sephardics did. This your people? Okay. All right, let's go here. Let's read what they're saying here. Here's another one. Ubar, the Galilean, gave the following exposition. The letter waw, W-A-W, and occurs 13 times in the passage dealing with wine. And Noah began to be an husbandman, and he planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his 2 brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon their shoulders and went backwards and covered their nakedness of their father. And their faces were backwards, and they saw not their father's nakedness. And Noah awoke from his wine and knew that his younger son had done unto him, or who knew what his younger son had done to him. Sorry. With respect to the last verse, Rob and Samuel different. Let's see, one maintaining that he castrated him, whilst the other says that he sexually abused him. Wow. He who maintains that he castrated him reasons thus. Let's see. Since he cursed him by the 4th son, he must have injured him with respect to the 4th son. But he who says that he sexually abused him draws an analogy between between and he saw written twice. All right, let's skip down here. Let's see. This is how confusing it's written. The Talmud. If you ever taken the time to read some of it, it's like, And they're constantly adding and changing stuff. Here it is written, and Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, whilst elsewhere it is written, and when the Shechem, the son of Hamor, saw her, he took her and lay with her and defiled her. Now on the view, he emasculated him. It is right that he cursed him by the fourth son. But on the view of that, he abused him. Why did he curse his fourth son? He should have cursed him. Should he have cursed him himself? Anyway, in the Talmud, what's the saying here? In the Talmud, Ham is accused of both castrating and sodomizing his father. So that's what they're calling us. They believe that we, the Negro, because that's what they believe, that we're the Negro comes out of Ham, is this is the viewpoints shared in the Talmud. The Talmud, again, is a collection of the oral law of elders, right? And both the Sephardics and the Ashkenazis abide by this. Okay, so let's bring this into conclusion because we're pretty much at the end of this. So what we're seeing here, so we've kind of established again, who the Sephardics were, who the black Portuguese were, and who the Negroes. And again, we look no further than we started off with that old excerpt. I mean, that writing from that old book there, whatever it was called here, the Annals of Literature Critical Review. Okay. And so we started with that. And once we read it in its full context, it made a lot of more sense, didn't it? And then we added layers to it by going to these other writings, historical writings, and it really helped fill in the blank with a lot of that stuff, right? Let's see. So what I'm seeing, just to bring this in conclusion, is the same attitudes that these Sephardics had, the same attitude that these black Portuguese had towards the Negroes. We see this today in what we call Israel, or true awakened Israel, as it relates to Africa, as it relates to the continent of Africa. I tell you, I don't know how many people I've come across, who are Hebrew, so to speak, who consider Africa or big parts of Africa being the land of Ham, that all of it is Ham, that these are nothing but Hamites. I had a couple of people just recently tell me, or one person tell me, that the Congo is made, they are Hamites. And I'm like, how do you know that? And I said, if that's the case, then you're a Hamite, because as we've demonstrated in many other historical renderings and everything else, we've been able to show that many of us so-called African Americans, those of us that have been scattered in the Caribbean, South America, and even when you start going into the slave trade, the Arab slave trade, many of these people all came out of Congo. Not all of them, but many of them did in that first and second wave of the whole slave trade. That's your people. That's your people. But what I'm seeing is that there is a true line of self-hate within the Hebrew community as it relates to this. And it's this desire to be an other. We don't want to be them. We're an other. But when you actually look at history in of itself, history doesn't lie. And it's a mirror that, unfortunately, for some people, they refuse to look at it because at the end of the day, they hate themselves. That's really what it comes down to. So anyway, so I hope you guys got something out of this. I know this was quite lengthy. It's a lot of information, I know. But again, if you are a seeker of truth, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of research and things like that. You never make any decisions simply on just looking at a YouTube video when it relates to you, who you are, your identity as a person, even as it relates to spiritual matters. You don't ever just look at a video and then make a decision based off of that. No, you take that to prayer. You understand what I'm saying? You never go to secondhand information. Oh, well, someone's going to did a video of your video and they said this and that or whatever. Well, the first question I have is, did you actually go to the sources that I'm showing you, that I put out there for you? Did you actually check those for yourself, or are you using other people to interpret it for you? That's lazy research. And it's very lazy on your part, quite honestly, you know, and it, you know, so we have to stay true to truth. Isaiah said, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. And he also talks about the spirit of truth. Our people need to be filled with his spirit. His spirit. We have to be filled with his spirit. And his spirit is the spirit of truth. And family, this is a necessity when we look at history. We have to be, if we're going to look at it honestly, we have to be filled with the spirit of truth. Because when you fill with the spirit of truth, you don't cut corners. You don't lie. You don't make things up. You don't launch personal attacks. You don't do those things. When truth really comes, you either adjust to it or you get mad. You know, Isaiah kind of told us that. He's the rock of offense. You either going to fall on it or it's going to fall on you, right? So anyway, there you go, family. Thank you so much for watching this. This is certainly one that I know you're going to have to watch probably a couple of times just to get all the information. If you have any questions of me, you can always reach out and email me, okay? Don't feel like you got to duke it out in the comment section or anything like that. If you really want to know the answer, you know, and if it's something that you know is going to be a quite lengthy answer, email me, okay? I'll get to it when I can. You know, it may take some time, but I'll get to you, okay? Don't mind the dialogue at all, but yeah, anything else, we're going to keep it moving, okay? Family, we love you. May the Most High bless you and keep you, and we'll be talking again soon. You guys take care.